In this video, we summarize some of the topics covered in the chapter that introduces application design. The chapter introduces the verb-noun method for class discovery and uses CRC cards for documenting classes and their interactions. Up to this point, our design concerns have mainly been at the level of a single class, in terms of encapsulation and cohesion, for instance, or at the level of a few closely related classes, in terms of responsibility-driven design and coupling. Now we look at the wider picture of whole application design. Given a new project, where do we start, and how do we systematically develop both the design and the implementation? Within the context of this short video, there isn't time to cover everything in the chapter, so we shall just highlight the main points. The scenario in the chapter involves the design of a cinema booking system. Here we see the description of the booking system. By now you will have come to appreciate that classes often model real-world entities. When considering the description of a system, therefore, we often identify the nouns in the description as potential classes in the implementation. The nouns we find in this description are as follows. It would be naive to assume that every noun we find will ultimately become a class. Descriptions such as the cinema booking system are usually written in informal prose, with little thought given to completeness or the avoidance of ambiguity. Synonyms will often have been used for what should be a single class rather than multiple classes, for instance, and some features might have been missed. Nevertheless, this approach represents a useful starting point and allows us to begin the process of clarification and refinement that is typically an ongoing and iterative feature of most projects. The second aspect of class design that you've probably come to appreciate by now is that objects have responsibilities and carry out actions. Actions tend to be associated with the verbs in a description, so we look for those and associate them with the nouns. We might need to think a bit about which nouns carry out the actions and which nouns have actions done to them. In linguistic terms, which nouns are the subjects and which are the objects of the verbs. Once again, though, we have to bear in mind that the description might not have been written with applying this sort of verb-noun analysis to it. For instance, the description says that customers are given a row number and a seat number. This says that customer objects have something given to them, which might ultimately turn into a receive method in a customer class. The number of potential classes and methods grows quickly in even a modest project, so we need some way to keep track of what we are discovering about the system. In the chapter, we suggest following Beck and Cunningham's approach of using physical index cards. Each card stands for a single class. The cards are known as CRC cards for Class, Responsibilities, Collaborators. Collaborators are the names of other classes to which this one is coupled in some way. That is, objects of the two classes will interact. If you do not have a supply of index cards, it is relatively easy to make a template in a document editor using a formatted table, and then print as many copies as are required. Here we illustrate how that might look, with the initial details of one of the classes filled in. However, it has to be admitted that cards are more robust than paper alternatives, and are preferable to use if they are available. The step of identifying potential classes from the nouns and responsibilities from the verbs is just the first of many that are likely to be needed before we reach the point of being able to start on implementation. The initial description is unlikely to have been complete, or to have revealed full details of what the final system will do. A good technique for further discovery is the use of scenarios. A scenario is an example of an activity that the system has to carry out or support. Scenarios are often referred to as use cases. As a typical scenario, such as making a booking, is played through, using the class cards to simulate interacting objects, a note is made on each of everything that is found out about the class in action, that is, further responsibilities and other collaborators. This process should be seen as one of refinement of the design. As more and more scenarios are played through, the details of the classes become clearer. However, it should also be borne in mind that we are also looking for the scenarios to reveal the need for new classes or to rule out classes that we thought were needed. The essential point is that making changes to the design at this stage is a relatively inexpensive process to carry out. Once we start committing to implementation, it will become much harder and much more expensive to redesign or restructure things. The chapter includes details of a number of scenarios for the cinema booking system. Finally, a degree of confidence will have been reached that the design captured in the CRC cards is pretty close to the system description. Now we can think about moving on to implementation. And this is where the first steps in implementation become relatively simple. We've been working with cards to represent the entities in the system, and each can now be mapped fairly readily to individual classes in source code. The responsibilities become methods that often constitute the public interface of a class, and collaborators will ultimately become fields, parameters, and return types within the class. In summary, we've described the verb-noun method for analyzing a system description as a starting point for system design. We've discussed the use of CRC cards as a convenient, low-tech method for documenting the initial exploration of the system. Working through scenarios allows us to refine our understanding of the system and the design of the classes before committing to source code. When the time comes to start implementation, the CRC cards provide a substantial starting point for the source code of the required classes.